Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the Lincolnshire Police and Crime panel. Are we live streaming?
Yes, Chairman, thank you.
We are live streaming. Okay, so a warm welcome to everybody. Commissioner, welcome to you and your team. And Chief Constable, thank you for coming. It's a very important meeting today with the policing precept, and we're very grateful for you to give up your time to come today. As you know, we will be asking a number of questions during the meeting. There may be some questions aimed at you, Chief Constable. We do acknowledge and appreciate that we don't look to scrutinise you, but we would appreciate if you could respond to some of those questions. They sort of verge on the operational, but the information will be very helpful to the panel. Thank you. Thanks very much. Thank you. So welcome to members of the public and the media who are on the live streaming, and welcome to people, members of the public in our public gallery. Did you want to say something, Commissioner? Okay, right. Okay, thank you. So do we have any apologies for absence, please?
Thank you, Chairman. I've received apologies from Councillor Richard Betroyd from Lincolnshire County Council. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I think Councillor Dilks, he's rung me this morning, as he's not very well, so he's also apologised for the meeting today. And Councillor Skinner isn't with us from Boston either. Okay, so moving on to item 3. Are there any disclosures of interest, please? No, I don't see any. So moving straight into item 4, which is around the minutes of our last meeting, which was held on the 26th of November. There are two parts, two sets of minutes under item 5. The first minutes of that meeting on the 26th of November, could I have a proposer that they're accurate, Councillor Waring, and a seconder, Mr. Kraviatz? Thank you. All in favour of that? All in agreement? Unanimous. And moving on to the exempt minutes, could I again have a proposer, Councillor Wotton, and a seconder, Councillor Burke? Thank you very much, gentlemen. All in favour of those minutes being accurate? That's unanimous as well. So thank you. So moving on to item 6 quickly, actions from those minutes. A number of those actions still remain outstanding, and I think, Commissioner, you're awaiting some responses from certainly the Safer Lincolnshire Partnership around domestic abuse.
Thank you, Chairman. Just to confirm, I understand the reasons why, and they're perfectly valid, but we didn't get the request for those until quite late in the day. So we're best endeavours to get the information to you as quickly as we can.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you for that. And moving on to item 7 then, communications from myself. Just to inform the meeting that in January I attended a Home Office webinar, which was around the review of police and crime commissioners and also the development of the effectiveness of police and crime panels. And I understand there's going to be a further webinar this month, and some members of this panel may be invited also to attend that, but we will be in touch with you when that occurs. So item 8, do we have any questions from the public, please?
Chairman, there's been no questions received from the public.
Thank you very much indeed. And quickly moving on to item 9, the delivery of the police and crime plan. Over to you, Commissioner. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chair. Just really to reiterate that obviously we brought the new police and crime plan to you very recently. So obviously we are now working on that, but it is early days, as you'll appreciate, in the new cycle with the plan. But I'm happy to take any questions that you may have.
Thank you very much, Commissioner. We do have a number of questions. The first one from Councillor Welburn, please.
Thank you and welcome everybody. My question is about the Environmental Crime Partnership section 2.1.14 Annex A. The report mentions there's been numerous convictions I wondered if you'd got an approximate amount of how many have been successfully prosecuted, and also to do with the seized vehicles. I know you've got Operation AceGuard, and that's about offenders' vehicles forfeited or destroyed. But I wondered, as this Operation Clean Sweep, whether the vehicles from there have also been crushed. Mainly, I think it's just that crushing would probably be more effective than fines if they are too low, as you state in your report. So, please.
Yeah, thank you for the question. I mean, the Waste Partnership is a partnership which includes all of our local government partners. So that data may well be available through local government routes, but it isn't something that I've got to hand, because it's obviously a level of detail that particular partnership would have, but it's not sort of run by me, if you like. It's a partnership approach. I'm sure it's something that is available, but it's not something that I have to hand.
Sorry, not even about the seized vehicles. You wouldn't know about that either.
Not to hand, no. I mean, it's quite an operational question rather than a strategic one that I would normally deal with. I mean, I would agree with you in broad terms that anything we can do to hit offenders in the pocket is always welcome. We do that in a number of different ways with all sorts of different crime types. You know, asset removal, you know, is always good, and certainly crushing vehicles is one of the methods that I would always be supportive of, whether it's for hair coursing, whether it's for any other kind of crime. But I can't give you specific detail off the top of my head about what the partnership has delivered in that space.
Okay, thank you. I don't know whether those details could be provided outside of this meeting.
What I can commit to, Chairman, is asking the question. If it's information that's held by the partnership, I will obviously have to ask permission for it. If it's readily available, of course, I'm happy to share it. It's just I don't want to commit to sharing something that I don't necessarily own.
Yeah, I understand that. Thank you very much. Okay, next question, Councillor Marsh, please.
Thank you, Chairman. Good morning, Commissioner and your team. 2.1.2, the twinning project. How much funding is the PCC allocating to this project? Is it not the role of the prison service to develop the ambitions of this project? And how will it really enable prisoners to gain a qualification which will help improve their life chances and help them gain employment upon release, as stated in your report? Thank you.
Thank you very much for the question. I will in a second bring in my partnerships delivery manager who has been pulling this together for me. I mean, it is not just a Lincolnshire approach. This is a national approach where professional football clubs are involved to sort of work to try and ensure that there is training and education to actually engage with people to try and reduce reoffending in the longer term. So I think it does have that benefit. But if I can pass this over to Jo, I'm sure she can give you a little bit more of the specifics around your question.
So in answer to your question, the sum that the PCC has contributed is £5,000, which has been matched by the twinning project themselves because the cost for the year is £10,000. There has actually been external evaluation undertaken on the twinning project by HMPPS, and we can happily share that evaluation with you, which does demonstrate positive outcomes and corresponding actions of offenders getting jobs on exit from prison or having a means of income because of the football training, they can take on roles in positions such as referees, which gives them a small income on perhaps a weekend basis whilst they can find other employment. But I'm happy to share the evaluation, the formal external evaluation with the panel.
Thank you, Chairman. Yeah, that'll be very useful. Thank you. And it is a small figure. It doesn't mention the report, but it is quite a small figure. And if it keeps one person from reoffending, it might be worth it for what we spend on some of them. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Marsh. Next question from Councillor Waring, please.
Thank you, Chairman. Good morning, Commissioner. The question is in relation to the areas of responsibility for your deputy. But can I first ask in relation to we were talking about the last meeting with him taking the lead on violence and crime types that disproportionately affect women and girls. Could we ask how he will be progressing with this area of work and through which forums his expected work plan will be shared and how?
Thank you for the question. I mean, there's elements to the role which will develop in time, and that will come as a result of particular interest that the deputy will have. So he will have certain, as my former deputy, developed a lot of skills and expertise and interest in tackling fraud and scams. What I'm working with my current deputy is he's particularly interested in how he can support and work around areas such as mental health, such as tackling vulnerability in the wider sense, but in particular, the larger work programme we've got going on about crimes that disproportionately affect women and girls, which we know is a national agenda issue as well as a local one. You know, there are a number of meetings and boards that we attend at a local level, so things like Health and Wellbeing Board, which he will attend on my behalf, but equally our own internal forums, victims meetings, but also at a regional level, he will attend the Regional Criminal Justice Board on my behalf, and he's also already attended and will continue to attend some national meetings through the APCC, which are specifically things like the Victims Portfolio Group, the Tackling Violence Against Women and Girls Group. He attended the Violence Against Women and Girls nationally only this week. So there's a whole range of work streams that are ongoing. So we obviously have internal processes where we will meet on a very regular basis to obviously ensure that I'm fully briefed on what's going on, to ensure that any decisions that are then being made are my decisions that are being carried through those forums. So I don't know if that gives you a flavour, but it's obviously quite early days in setting up a lot of not just the working relationship with the new deputy, but actually some of these developing work streams. So the fact that I've committed to put £3 million over 3 years into a partnership approach to tackle violence and harm reduction, we're currently working with public health in Lincolnshire to actually set up what that will look like there. As it mentions in the report, needs assessments are being done, etc. So an amount of work will flow from that, but it's yet unclear how that will manifest and where I will plug in and where my deputy will plug in. So it's something that I think we can come back to in the future to keep you updated on.
That would be greatly appreciated, because, you know, we would like to see the progress in the areas of responsibility for your deputy and the way in which it's progressing. I mean, the areas that you've talked about are very important for the future of Lincolnshire, and certainly I'm sure my colleagues would want to see that this is dealt with in a constructive way. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much. Next question, Councillor Welburn, please.
Thank you. This is with reference to section 3.2 of your report. May we have a copy of the evaluation of the Lincolnshire alert system when it's available, please?
Absolutely, no problem at all.
Okay, thank you. And a further question from Councillor Welburn.
Sorry. Yes, it's again 5.1.2 of the report. Has there been much interest in the sale of West Parade building, and do you have a timeline for completion?
At the moment, sort of discussions about levels of interest would be something that would be quite commercially sensitive, so I wouldn't want to go into it in an open forum meeting. I mean, what we're finding generally with larger public assets is that it's quite an unpredictable market. So we've seen that with Lincolnshire County Council, with some of the sales that it's been progressing, that they've been quite hard to predict. So I'm not sort of counting my chickens, as it were, at this stage. I think it's a case of we will have to get to the deadline, because the other thing that happens when you have a tender process, quite often people might express interest. It doesn't mean it will materialise into a tender, and even if it does, it doesn't mean it will be an acceptable level. So at this stage, I think it's one that we'll have to keep our eye on. I mean, it's a very unpredictable market at the minute.
Okay, thank you. And a further question from Councillor Welburn, please.
Sorry, this is a very simple one again. 6.1.3 and 6.1.5 of the report. Can we have an update of the evaluation of the Rural Crime Action Team and Single online home at the appropriate time, please. I know it'll be sometime in the future, but I think it's important that we see how they're going. Thanks.
Yeah, I mean, I can confirm as well that all of the elements that we allude to in here, with them being commitments that have been formally made previously in conjunction with the Chief Constable, will be things that I'll be focusing on through our public accountability meetings as well, which obviously we publish all of the information for that, and it goes out broadcast, so you'd be able to hear those. But certainly, as we get that information, I'm obviously happy to share it with the panel.
Okay, thank you. The next question is from Councillor Marsh. It's referred to in your report, Commissioner, but it is verging on the operational. So I think it will be pointed at you, Chief Constable, if you're happy to take it. Thank you. Absolutely.
Thank you, Chairman. 6.1.1 additional officers. I note the appointment of 60 new officers will, after their initial 21-week training period, be deployed to Boston, Skegness and Spalding. Whilst this increase in numbers for the sub-region area is welcome, can I have a reassurance that experienced officers will not be moved away from these towns to other areas? As the PCC points out in his report, these new officers take a further 18 months of training to be considered as fully trained and competent. And basically, in a nutshell, is can we have some reassurance that the experienced officers won't be moved aside to let the new ones come in to balance the number still, but these will be additional officers to this sub-region. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I can give you the assurance. What I can't do is make a promise that we're not going to move people according to where our skills and needs are and where the resources are, but this is growth on top of what we have, and we're prioritising the east of the county at the moment because that's where we found the most significant gaps. We're not moving experienced officers out because we need them there to be tutoring and mentoring the new recruits coming through, and it is about bolstering the numbers there, not about putting new people in so we can move the more experienced out. There is always going to be an ebb and flow of officers depending on their skills and where we need them and moving into specialist roles, but our intention is to make sure that there's a balance across the board.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Chief Constable. That's refreshing to see, and I know that people of certainly East Lindsey will welcome these new officers, because we always feel that we do get left behind a little bit. But thank you very much for that assurance.
Okay, thank you very much for that, Chief Constable. Next question from Councillor Burke, please. Can you put your microphone on, please, Councillor Burke? Thank you.
Unaccustomed as I am to public speaking, this question's not just come from me. It's actually come from the various community boards in Lincoln who contacted me. So but I will say that discussing this earlier here, board members here say the same issue applies across Lincolnshire. At citywide community board meetings, there's concern regarding the perceived reduction of the number of PCSOs in our City of Lincoln communicated to local councillors. The boards have noted with dismay the reduction of PCSOs in Lincoln in recent years. Each of our neighbourhood boards has had regular contact with them, and their input and responsiveness to local conditions has always been greatly welcomed. They have attended board meetings when possible, and this has been a vital link between the police and our communities. They've kept us up to date with activities where local cooperation was desired and the results were subsequently appreciated. As you will know, the population of Lincoln has been steadily expanding. It's got 2 universities, remains the principal retail and entertainment venue for much of the surrounding area. While we have seen some changes since the coming of COVID-19, within that, the city will eventually be fully open again. So, and as I say, other people, when we discussed this earlier, other people in this room said, well, actually the same applies in our communities elsewhere. And the question then is, would the Commissioner please indicate if there are any plans to balance the 60 officer recruitment process referred to in his report with an uplift of PCSOs?
This might be one that we both chip in on, if that's acceptable to you, Councillor. I mean, we've always had a clear approach that there would be a blend of full-time officers, special constables, PCSOs, and indeed volunteer PCSOs. And there's been no sort of agreement to run down, if you like, the number of PCSOs. In fact, we have consistently run above the number that's been agreed in budget. So we've generally agreed because it's very peak when you remember we would get external funding as well towards PCSOs. There was 120, 125. And then that has reduced to 85 as the standing amount, but I think it's been around 95 for some considerable time. But some of those are involved in other things, such as reducing offending work and that kind of thing. One of the challenges has been, what do you spend your money on? And we've been clear and consistent in the last few years that priority would be given to recruiting full-time warranted officers. That has been and remains the fundamental key commitment to the community, and I think it's the right one, and we've delivered on that. Equally, it's a fairly obvious equation. If we're doing that, we will get some PCSOs who choose to join the police, which is what's happened. You can't predict necessarily where they come from in the force, so sometimes you might get 2 from one particular area that choose to join and are successful in joining, where actually in another part of the county they may not choose to join. And so you can suddenly get a little bit of an imbalance that takes some time to resolve. Equally, it's not possible to run a training program for 1 or 2. So you need a critical mass of people to be able to train effectively to then replace. And obviously that means that you will get to a certain level before you can then run an appropriate training scheme to recruit to fill those gaps. But we've certainly not had any discussions about reducing it from the number that was budgeted in previous budget papers. But I'll pass over to the Chief to comment on that.
Okay, thank you. And I'm just going to echo what the Commissioner's just said, really, is that our numbers have remained at 85. I've made a commitment openly with the Commissioner about maintaining the 85 on our budget. And as part of our establishment, and it's reflected in the papers that you've got in front of you today. We have been running above that, but there has been some noise internally in the force that our deployable numbers have dropped. It's actually perception rather than reality. We currently have 81 deployable PCSOs. We have 6 on secondment in crime reduction and victim care at the moment. We need to think about how we can realign those and replace with police staff. But there are some realities in terms of recruitment process. As the Commissioner said, you need a critical number to make it worthwhile running the course. Running a course for 4 PCSOs as recruits is not financially viable. So we have a course scheduled for October this year when with the attrition rate we're predicting, we will have sufficient numbers to make that course viable. We also need to bear in mind that with the change in the Police Education Qualification Framework, PEQF, PCSOs will be required to go through that process as well as police officers and have consistent training alongside their colleagues. We are currently building the PEQF training programme. That isn't going to be ready until October, which is another factor in our recruitment process. So there are some pressures there, but at the moment there are 80, it's actually 80.6 full-time equivalent, but I call it 81. The other pressure we've had is the police officer uplift. So most of our training teams are committed to police officer uplift and getting those numbers through, and there is no spare capacity in our training teams at the moment because of that and getting the police officer numbers on the ground. So it's all about sequencing and about balance, but we remain committed to the 85.
Very grateful, Chair, very grateful. I'm very grateful for the detail of those responses. Just in the spirit of the question, and because I know the people who asked the question, is there a recognition that PCSOs do actually bring to the job sometimes things that warranted officers don't bring? I mean, for example, in my own ward, the PCSOs have now decided to hold their own surgeries in Lincoln, and that idea came from them. Obviously, they're supported by warranted officers in doing that. Is there an aspiration to increase their numbers in the future?
I mean, the short answer is there's an aspiration to get more funding from central government to deliver a greater level of service across the county, which would include PCSOs. It wouldn't exclusively be for PCSOs. I would, you know, my aspirations are to get sufficient funding for an uplift in PCSOs, the number of call handlers we have taking 101 and 999, the amount of people we've got doing investigation of crime, rural crime, roads police, you name it. We want more of it. It's what the people of Lincolnshire deserve. So that's what we're fighting for. So yes is the very short answer. I suppose the other thing I would say is what we haven't ever explored, and due to financial constraints, I don't think it would necessarily get anywhere in Lincolnshire. But in some counties, such as Northamptonshire, they have arrangements with districts who actually pay for, on top of the establishment, PCSOs. So if, for example, Lincoln wanted 2 specific PCSOs that they wanted to do specific work, etc., then we could engage with them in how that could work. But it would be subject to the operational independence of the Chief Constable, of course. But that is something that some areas in the country do. And that also has been extended in Northamptonshire to parish councils. So where you've got towns such as Horncastle, Louth, there are arrangements in a similar way with those councils that have tax raising powers in some councils. We haven't explored that in Lincolnshire, but certainly if there was an appetite, if suddenly I was overwhelmed with people wanting to have PCSOs and could find the funding to provide it, I'm sure we could add them to our recruitment list in October.
Thank you very much for that. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Burke. Maybe Lincoln City Council might want to consider what the Commissioner's just said.
I was afraid you were going to say that.
Thank you very much. Okay, so our next question is from Councillor Waring. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. Commissioner, question in relation to the G4S contract. Concerning the transition with the G4S contract and the challenges it presents to G4S employees and the important function it delivers, can you provide assurance that this will be a seamless transition from the public's perspective? And how will this be best communicated, please?
That's certainly our aim and objective, is that the public would not really notice any difference at all. And there's something almost demoralising about working exceptionally hard across the entire organisation for a number of months and indeed years to hopefully achieve an outcome which means nobody notices. But that is broadly what we're trying to do. I mean, there is engagement going on at a number of levels. I mean, what's quite unique about this, that the contract is owned by the Police and Crime Commissioner rather than the Chief Constable. Therefore, although these staff work for G4S, the contract sits with me. Broadly, what's going to happen with a vast majority of services is that they will come back in-house, but then they would come under the employment of the Chief Constable rather than the PCC. So it sort of is an interesting thing. So as an example, there are members of staff, and there are in other departments, but I'll use, because it's in my head, the Force Control Room, who used to be Lincolnshire Police staff, who were then outsourced to the G4S contract, and now we'll be welcoming them back to Lincolnshire Police. There are equally others that have never been part of that Lincolnshire Police arrangement previously, and they will be coming back or coming in for the first time. So it's a really big and complex thing. What I can tell you is that people are working tirelessly to ensure that this works and ensure that the effectiveness of the transition delivers both for the public, but also for the people who obviously are directly affected in their employment on a daily basis. You know, they are very much at the centre of our thinking. They're the individuals that, you know, are Lincolnshire Police family, regardless of whether they wear a G4S lanyard or a Lincolnshire Police one, they're Lincolnshire Police family, and they deliver on a daily basis for the community. So that has always been at the forefront of our mind.
A very difficult situation for everyone to be facing, and I just do hope that you're able to continue on in that way with a successful conclusion. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Councillor Waring. The final question on the police and crime plan is from Councillor Wotton. I think actually this is probably aimed at you as well, Chief Constable. More an operational question.
Morning, Commissioner. At 6.1.3, you talk about the rural crime action team proactively policing rural crime, including the illegal hunting of foxes with dogs. Now, legislation talks about packs of dogs. Can you give me some assurance that you won't be targeting the lawful Boxing Day hunt type hunts, which are traditional across Lincolnshire? Thank you.
Okay, I can give you the assurance. So our role is to be impartial in all of this. The rural crime team will be looking at how we protect lawful hunts from hunt saboteurs and the protesters, and also making sure anybody who does wish to protest against it does it in a lawful and orderly manner, as well as then trying to make sure that unlawful hunting and is not taking place as well. So it's a wide remit of the team, but it will be a balanced one. It will be impartial and it will be done fairly. And I think the real advantage of the team is actually we have a dedicated team there with whom organisers can speak and work through what their options are, so that there is a very clear understanding what the boundaries are between lawful, unlawful, and where we're going to intervene and what those tipping points are.
Okay, thank you very much for that. We'll now move to item 10 on the agenda, which is the proposed policing precept. Over to you, Commissioner. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Councillor Wootton, I think your microphone's still on. Thank you.
No, I hadn't spotted that. Thank you, Chairman. It might be me getting older, but these seem to come around quicker and quicker, these once a year meetings. But it's never with any joy that we sit here and discuss whether the people of Lincolnshire should be paying any more on their council tax. And as small as the policing element is against the entire council tax bill, and regardless of whether people overall in Lincolnshire pay significantly less than, let's say, our neighbours in Nottinghamshire, it's irrelevant. These are taxpayers who across the county are working really hard to earn a living, to pay their bills and to go about their lives. And I never underestimate the responsibility we all have in discussing their money and what we are proposing to do with it. And it's always with that in mind that I set out to deliver the most robust consultation I can across the county to ensure that we can, with some certainty, understand the views of the public across the county. Every year I push the team harder to say we need to engage with groups that we previously didn't. We need to work harder to make sure that we're hearing views. One of the things that we introduced a couple of years ago, for example, was a free text box. Now, anybody who's done a significant survey will know that when you say to thousands of people, you have a box here, you can put your comments in and we'll read them all, we'll put them all into some kind of table, we'll digest them, understand them and do something with the information. It's quite a task, but it felt really right that people had the option to actually really share their views. So that's the way I approach this. And you'll know from previous years that we employ a professional company to make sure that we have a statistically robust approach to this. And this year is no different. And I often have to question my personal view and what I think is right versus what the public are telling me. And they don't always align. I'm naturally inclined to believe in low taxation, and I find it difficult to come to the panel and ultimately to the public and say, well, actually, you've told me that you want to protect these services, increase these services, and so that's what we're going to do at the cost of your council tax. But that is quite clearly what people do say and have said this year. But along with that, I take very seriously the fact that they expect us to be clear about what we will do with that money. And that is why, again, we've sat down together, the chief and I, and delivered some clear pledges about what we would do with the public's money if we were to receive it. And that gives a very clear steer to them about what the priorities are going to be for spending that money. So it's with that in mind that I will happily take any questions, Chairman. In fact, I think we've got some detail for you, haven't we?
Yeah, sure. Thank you. So can I invite Julie Flint now from is it Finance Director, Julie? Financial Officer, my apologies, to do a presentation to the panel. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. Well, as is usual, I've got one or two slides just to run through and set out for you what are the key financial considerations that underpin the Commissioner's Precept proposal. And the next slide just sets out what the headings are. So first of all, we'll have a look at the police grant settlement. This is the money that comes from central government, and we got knowledge of that just before Christmas, confirmed earlier this week. Then we'll have a look at what the plans are for spending and for funding, and then look ahead to see what the future funding landscape might look like, before having a look at how we manage financial risk, and then finally what the impact on the Precept is. So first of all, then, the provisional settlement. Well, as expected, we were notified of what the final tranche was of the additional officers. You recall that there was a national uplift of 20,000 officers, and this final tranche is 8,000 officers nationally. And of the 8,000 officers, Lincolnshire has been allocated 67. And that includes 4 for serious organised crime. So it takes the number of officers for Lincolnshire now up to 1,186. And in financial terms, the settlement gave Lincolnshire core grant of 71.3 million out of the 8.6 billion that's available nationally, which represents just less than 1% of the overall total. So, as I say, the grant increased by 3.7 million for 22-23. That effectively gives us the funding for those additional officers. In addition to that, there was an allocation of 1.1 million, which is non-recurrent, so it's a one-off allocation for next year, and that's available to support and provide for those sort of initial costs that are required because of the officer uplift. So additional training, additional uniforms, cars, etc. So that's ring-fenced and has to be claimed against those expenses that are incurred as part of the uplift. You'll recall for a number of years now we've had what's known as a pension top-up grant. It's a technical thing to do with the actuarial valuation of the employer's contribution. That's been maintained at 1.2 million. And the settlement confirmed what was previously announced in October in the spending review, that there would be Precept flexibility of up to £10 per annum for a Band D property for all police and crime commissioners. And unusually this year, the announcement of the Precept cap was set for 3 years rather than just the 1 year. In the past, we've only been ever told a year at a time what that Precept flexibility is. This year, we've been told it will be up to £10 for the next 3 years. The next slide is around what spending looks like. And this just gives you an indication of broadly where the money goes to. So on the basis of a spending budget of around £151 million, you can see there the purple bit on the right. By far and away, the largest proportion of that spending goes on police officers. So almost 47% of the budget goes on police officers. There's then an amount, if we work round in a clockwise direction, for police staff and PCSOs. At the moment, that's showing us 10.6%, but that will increase significantly because at the moment, the money that is currently paid to G4S, which is largely for people's salaries, is currently held in the support functions category because we haven't disaggregated those payments yet across the various headings, for example, staff and contracts and so on. We'll be doing that sometime in the new year when we're clear on on how to disaggregate the funding. So the next biggest slice of funding, once we've done that, will be on police staff and PCSOs. And you can see there's things like other costs, which will be fleet and premises and so on. So that just gives an indication of where the money goes to. This next slide sets out the position across the medium term. And you can see there that that the first column of numbers represents the current financial year of 140 million. And you can see there that, there's an increasing profile of spend, around 6.5 million more in next year. And just to be clear about what the penultimate line is on that table, what that's showing is that there is an ongoing difference between our spending plans and what we think is going to come by way of funding. I'll say more about that later because, what we've got is an ambition to invest in services, and we'll be looking to address that budget gap through various means across the medium term. But in 22-23, the increase in spending there includes the additional funding for the new police officers, the additional police officers that I've talked about, the fact that there will be a cost increase as a result of the G4S services transferring back to Lincolnshire, because we've always said we got a really good deal and made significant savings through the G4S contract. National insurance contributions going up, we all know about that. That's going to add another £1 million. Increased investment in IT services and also a new enterprise resource planning system and a digital forensics server, adding about 2 million, and then some other things as well. So some significant investment going into delivering services into next year and beyond that. If we move on then to the funding side of the equation, you can see there really two sources of income in the main, 45% coming from local council taxpayers and 55% coming from central government. And the table there on the right just sets out the different components of the central funding and local funding. The next slide gives a medium-term perspective of funding. And across the period, you can see there that, funding goes up in 22-23. I think the heading's there wrong. 22-23. And then broadly, it's going up by around 2 million a year after that. Now, the assumptions that underpin our funding perspective is that police grant from now on will remain flat because it has been going up, because it's been going up to fund the additional police officer numbers. But our expectation is that, and our planning assumption is that it will remain flat thereafter, which is what's happened, historically. That's been the approach. It's not what we want to happen, because what we want to happen is for police grant to go up because Lincolnshire secures a bigger share of police grant. And there is an ongoing, you'll have heard in previous years about work that's been going on nationally to review the police funding formula. That work has started again, and the Commissioner is a member of the National Steering Group, which is very helpful for us. And our hope and expectation is that this time this work will come to fruition and hopefully, provide, we've provided the evidence in the past, the fact that Lincolnshire doesn't receive what we would see as a fair share of the funding pot. So hopefully, over the course of the medium term, that police grant figure will start to go up. But at the moment, we've left it in flat, being prudent. The other thing that the medium-term perspective includes is the assumption of the £9.99, £10 per annum increase in Precept across each of the 3 years of the spending review period. So that's next year and the year following 2 years. And that's where the increase of around 2 million a year is coming from. So that's the funding side of the equation. Just one of our favourite graphs there that shows, if you look at resource funding per head of population, there's Lincolnshire on the far right of the graph there. The funding per head of population is the lowest out of all forces. Okay, if we move on to risks and mitigation. Now, the numbers as presented here and in your papers of necessity and because of timing considerations are prior to having finalisation of information from the district councils around the collection fund and also the council tax base. So once we get to the budget, which will be towards the end of February, the Commissioner's budget decision, that will incorporate the updated collection fund numbers and the updated council tax base. As I say, we've not included anything at the moment about the police funding formula review. We've assumed that it will remain flat to us. We're hopeful that it will mean that we'll get some more money, but I suppose there's always the possibility it could mean less. But, so we're aware of that risk and we need to provide for it. Risk this year, which is different to certainly, recent past, is the inflationary impacts. We're all hearing about inflation and we'll need to be really clear and, manage that inflationary impact into the medium term. So how are we mitigating those risks then? Well, we're maintaining a focus on productivity and efficiency and investing in order to deliver productivity and influence the grant distribution review, maximise funding opportunities where we can. And the Commissioner has been very successful, over the last couple of years or so, and prior to that in securing special grants and other sources of funding for Lincolnshire. And we will continue to make applications for special grant to help us through that medium-term perspective. So what does this mean for the Precept then? The next slide, I think, shows the results of the public consultation, which are in your papers. And the Commissioner's already spoken about that. So 75% prepared to pay at least 5% more on their council tax for policing. The next slide just indicates the impact of a £9.99 increase for a band D, what that means across the bands. So it ranges from £6.66 for a band A through to £19.98 for a band H. The final slide just shows what it means per annum and per week, what it means for us, what additional income. So a £9.99 increase to a band D precept generates £2.1 million of additional income each year on a recurrent basis. All I wanted to say, thank you.
Thank you very much, Julie. That's very helpful to the panel members in making their decision today regarding your proposal. So thank you. We do have a number of questions. So the first question is from Mr. Kraviatz, please.
Thank you and welcome, Commissioner and Chief Constable and all your staff. Many of the questions may seem repetitive after the very helpful presentation from Julie, but for the sake of completeness, I will ask them in detail, or some have been actually answered in the comments. My first question is, what inflation calculations have you used in calculating the budget for this year? Now, I ask that because if the inflation is going to be higher than we think it's going to be, there's going to be more pressures on you. So
what I'll do as I normally do with the more technical questions, I'll defer to my CFO, as it's always good to see somebody earn their pay. Thank you.
She earned it by that presentation this morning.
So we have specific allowances, and as you've seen, the bulk of our spend is on people. So inflationary pressures largely are around pay awards, and included within the budget is an allowance of 2.5%. For pay awards. For other areas of the budget where we're clear that we've got, for example, contractual increases, it will be included at the actual increase rather than an estimate. And we also maintain some contingency as well. So partially it's...
Commissioner.
Sorry, I just wanted to add to that, because on the pay award, it's a really important point that as part of the national, we the Home Office Council about what the ask of Treasury was going to be. There was a working assumption around a pay award, and we were working around the 2.5%, which is why obviously forces largely have adopted that approach. It was clear, and it's been put in writing through the sort of letter we get back from the Home Office confirming the budget settlement, in effect, that if there are greater pay awards, they would be open to a conversation. That's not the same as we'll see you right, Gov, but it is clear indication that, you know, that conversation we'd had initially, you know, they are understanding that actually that would be an additional pressure for forces. So it isn't just the case that if there's a larger pay award, we are on our own. There would be a national conversation.
Thank you. I take it they've taken the 1.5% national insurance increase into account as well. Yeah, thank you for that. My next question is in relation to under para 5.4 of the main report, the target for officers for 2025-26 is 1186. Am I correct in reading that actually we will reach this target by the end of the next financial year? That's as I read the report. And does this figure take into account natural wastage? And if so, how many actual officers were recruited during that period?
I'm all over a fever. It sounded like a GCSE maths question, that. I mean, yeah, I'm trying to decipher in my head the information that you've just given. The 1186 will be achieved with our next intake. Is that right? 2 intakes. So they will conclude. It'll be March. So yes, yeah. So that's right. Your second part of the question was,
how many does that figure take into account natural wastage, and how many actual officers are you recruiting? Because you've got to train those extra officers, which puts extra pressure on the police in terms of training.
It does. So we're recruit. Basically, what you've got to do is double up your recruitment numbers to make the police officer uplift. So we're running at the moment effectively 2 cohort trainings groups at the same time, which is where actually the investment in Skegness and the training centre has become absolutely invaluable, because we've got 1 cohort at headquarters at Nettleham, 1 cohort working at Skegness. So that spread across the county has made a huge difference to us. But as I said before, our training team are completely consumed with this at the moment. But yes, we do.
If the budget, as is said, is based on a complement of 1186, is that based for the full year, or is it on an incremental basis? And does it take into account the actual salaries to be paid or the top of the scale?
We budget for what we think the costs are going to be. You know, we have an average cost model. That's how we budget for police officers. The 1186 is for the whole year and for the whole period across the whole medium term. There will be ups and downs because it's not a science, it's an art. Because police officers decide themselves when they're going to leave. And so we have to estimate when we think police officers are going to leave, and therefore put the recruitment tranches in at the appropriate time. So it will go up and down.
I understand that. I understand that's. I think that's the correct way of doing it. But actually, it means that gives you a little bit of headroom, because if you budgeted for 1186 and some of the times you haven't got 1186, you've got more money coming in. And I support that, by the way. But I think that's what you do. That's what it's good accountancy.
Just clarify on that. We budget for what we think the profile is going to be across the year, not for a flat 1186, because we don't want to have an underspend. You know, we want to make sure that we've got as much money going into police officers as we can afford.
Again, I've got 4 questions altogether, so apologies for that. Again, most of this, actually, this next one has been answered. Both in Table 1 in the main report and Table A in Annex C, there are significant increases both in the PCC and Chief Constable expenditure. Could the PCC give more details, and I think Julie's done some of this already, on the increased costs, one of 945k in the strategic partnership line, the increased costs of 278k in other direct PCC budgets, the 4.4 million increase in policing costs, and the 1.280 million increase in cost of police staffing, which I think is the G4S contract. But I'd be grateful for a little bit more clarification so we know actually where the money's going.
I didn't jot all of those down. I mean, the 4.4 million is for police officers. That's why because the numbers are going up. Sorry, can you remind me what the others were?
Was it the 945 into strategic partnership line?
So the strategic partnership line is going up because, as I say, our expectation is that the costs of those services will increase because we know we were getting a very good deal from G4S. And as the services move back in-house, it means that of necessity the cost will increase.
We mean not being very bright, but if that's a strategic partnership cost, then what's the 1.28 million increase in cost of police staffing? Is that not double accounting?
Some of that will be national insurance. Off the top of my head, just trying to. I think.
I'm very happy if you said right.
Yes. Yeah.
I know it's detail.
Yep. Question 4. Thank you.
My final question is in relation to reserves. At para 7.1 in Annex C, it states that there were about 26 million quid in reserves, pounds, I should say, not quid, I beg your pardon, 1st of April 2021. What do you expect the reserves to be at the end of March 2022?
I mean, it's quite a complex question because money is coming in and out of reserves all the time. I think broadly I'd expect it to see it at the same level because we're not really using reserves this year. Our plan is that reserves will come into play next year. But I mean, certainly I can provide that information.
Thank you. As I read the current budget, the intention, I know it's to be revised, the intention is to have about 9.1 million in reserves as outlined in para 7.5 of Appendix C and about 15 million in earmarked reserves as outlined in 7.6, which we are told includes £5 million possible unless we get a grant for balancing the budget, £3 million for the violence and violence fund, etc. Could we have an outline sometime, it may not be possible today, what all these various funds are and how they're actually, what expenditure's taking place in them? If you have I'm a great believer in having earmarked reserve funds, but if they're not being utilised for the last 3 or 4 years, then we'll ask the question whether or not the money could be used for other things.
Yes, the Commissioner is required to produce a reserve strategy each year, which sets out in considerable detail what each reserve is, what the value of it is, what the plans are for adding to or taking away from each reserve over the course of the medium term. And that's published on the Commissioner's website every year. So that's publicly available, but we can certainly send you the link so that you can access that.
That'll be very helpful because there's a significant amount of money there, and as I repeat, I'm in favour of having earmarked reserves, but you ensure that if it's not going to be utilised for anything, hasn't been utilised for 3 or 4 years, then we'll query whether or not you need the reserves on that basis. My final question, you'll be pleased to know, if there are about £26 million in reserves, and we have identified, by my calculations, 24.1 million of them, what's happening to the 1.9 million?
as I say, reserves are changing on a daily basis because things are moving into and out of reserves. So we've got a number in here, which is the position on reserves as at the 1st of April 2021. And during the year, there will be drawdowns and adding to the reserves. I can certainly provide you with an indication of what the forecast is for 1st of April 22. It's all set out in the strategy that I referred to earlier.
I'm grateful for that. That would be helpful. But I still don't understand that if reserves are going up and down, when they go down and then they go back up again, where does the money for them to go back up again come from?
Well, for example, the Commissioner secured a special grant at the end of 2021, the financial year, which actually wasn't approved by the Home Office until the beginning of the 2022, start of April 21. So it wasn't in the reserves as at the end of March 21 because it hadn't been approved. It went into reserves in April 21 when the Home Office allocated it. It was about £4 million, I think, and there were plans to use that £4 million, including bringing forward the recruitment of police officers during the current year. So the £4 million went into reserves in April and started being drawn down during the year. So that's just an example of one of the reserves, how it's being used throughout the year to fund expenditure. Is transparent because when it's used to be spent, it's the subject of a decision drawing down the reserves and amending the revenue budget. So it's all very clear to see how reserves are being used to fund spending.
Again, very grateful. Thank you for your comprehensive answer in terms of things. I'm a simple lawyer. I don't understand accountancy situations, although I still don't understand that if money's come out in and out, how it's dealt with, but that's me being thick. However, it would be very helpful if we had it pointed out for public transparency, actually where the monies are coming in and out on that basis. And it's on the Commissioner's website, as I understand it. So that's helpful. And can I just say about, despite what you might have thought hostile questions, they're not meant to be, that I'm a supportive of the budget proposals.
Commissioner, you'd like to come in?
Yeah, just a quick one. I mean, I think they're all very reasonable questions. I haven't got a problem with the questions at all. And as you say, for transparency, they're all on the website. So from that point of view, but it's a great example, I think, this of where it would be really helpful in us working together. If you've got some very technical, detailed questions you want to know about a subject, if you let us know in advance, we can bring the information and we could have given you a very detailed and specific answer today, rather than as members you're being frustrated by having to wait for an answer. And I'm obviously conscious that, members of the press are here, we'd have been able to give them a detailed answer. So I would always welcome, if you want that level of detail, just ask, we'll bring it, it's fine.
I think it's a very reasonable point to make, if I may say, Chairman.
Yeah, absolutely.
As long as we get the reports in a sufficient time to be able to look at the reports, ask the questions, then send them back to you, because otherwise it's concentrated time. But it's a very reasonable point.
Yeah, absolutely. A very reasonable point. Okay, moving on then to our next question. Councillor Marsh, please.
Thank you, Chairman. Annex C, Table A, details that to balance the revenue-based budget in 22-23, approximately 5 million of reserves will be utilised or a special grant used. Which reserves will be used to balance the budget if a special grant is not received? And what is the likelihood of Lincolnshire receiving a special grant? Thank you.
As I said earlier, the numbers in here are of necessity provisional because we didn't have the council tax base, etc. So it's there or thereabouts, that the 5 million at the moment. Obviously, it will be finalised before the budget is set. We do have funding in what we call a budget flexibility reserve, which has largely been provided by previous special grant claims. And that's the reserve that we will be intending to use to balance the budget next year.
Thank you. The next question I think's been answered actually, but just for clarity, I think you previously said, Commissioner, that when the G4S contract is finalised and you go to in-house services, the budget responsibility will move to the Chief Constable.
Yes, well, certainly the employment risk and responsibility passes to the Chief Constable. I think it's fair to say we will share the budget responsibilities, given that obviously the finance comes in to the OPCC and then we agree a budget with the Chief. So I think I'll go as far as to say we'll share the budget, but I'm clear where the employment responsibilities are.
Thank you very much. Thanks for that clarification. Next question, Councillor Welborn, please.
Thank you, Chairman. No, sorry.
Sorry,
Which one
Councillor
was it?
Waring, my apologies.
I just thought I'd change my name and don't I? Please could you update the panel on your attempts to secure a fairer funding formula for Lincolnshire Police, and what is the government's current position in relation to this? I know this has been alluded to during the thing, but I really do feel that we need to make sure that the general public understand the pressures that you and yours are under in dealing with the financial pressures, please.
Thank you for the question. As has already been stated by my CFO, I sit sort of on the national working group leading for crime commissioners in this work. I'm representing everybody, not just myself, clearly. We have sitting on that working group, myself, the APCC finance lead, which is Roger Hurst, who's Essex PCC, and also Alan Billings, who's South Yorkshire, who is the Labour Group finance lead. So we have two people that are very expert in finance sitting in there as well. And that gives the ability to obviously articulate some of those challenges around funding which aren't currently taken into account in the funding formula. And as flawed as the funding formula is, one of the biggest problems with it is that it hasn't been updated. So the data that it uses to actually hasn't been updated since 2013. So not only is the various elements of the formula not necessarily the right set for modern policing, but the data it's working on is 9 years out of date. So it is just simply not a formula anymore. We're just putting out finance based on history. So that's got to be resolved. And only in the last few days, the Prime Minister was asked in PMQs, amongst other things, about the funding formula. And he was clear in the government's commitment to deliver the funding formula in this Parliament. Now, I can't control when this Parliament runs to. But that was the clear commitment from the Prime Minister that, you know, the policing minister is working to deliver a new formula in this Parliament term. We've been here before and things can get in the way. So I can't start budgeting on the assumption we'll have extra funding because that will not make, you know, prudent sense. But everything we can do is being done. Our MPs are all on side with it. Obviously, your support is very welcome. And ultimately, we are pushing fairer, more appropriate funding. We saw the spending per head of population, and what's not taken into account, not only do we get the least amount per head of population, but it's the sparsity. And I've done this before, but my counterpart up in North Yorkshire likes to point out that their area is bigger than ours. But I like to point out that you can't live in a third of theirs because it's the moors. You can live in every part of Lincolnshire. The urban areas are equally distributed. The villages are equally distributed. And actually, you can find yourself needing to get 60 minutes for a firearms incident with an appropriate unit in Lincolnshire. You equally can spend the same amount of time trying to get to a custody suite. So we have some fairly unique challenges that aren't currently accounted for in the formula, which we're trying to get accounted for. So just my absolute commitment that that's my priority.
Commissioner, I mean, obviously, anything that can be said or done to back up the words that you're saying today is very needed, because we seem to be left behind and pushed to one side by central government considering what they need to do for the benefit of Lincolnshire Police. So I do hope that sense will prevail sometime. Thank you.
Chief Constable, you'd like to say something?
Thank you, Chair. Councillor, just to give some further reassurance that there's a parallel piece of work happening with Chief Constables. I sit on a steering group of Chief Constables looking at the funding formula. There's an acceptance amongst my colleagues across the country that this needs to change. There are where we would like it to be is actually there should be no losers in this, because that's obviously the point where it becomes unpalatable, particularly for some of the forces that would lose out. But again, echoing what the Commissioner's just said, we're pushing for consideration around what the current data is, the geographical impact of it, but also importantly for us, the temporal analysis of it. So actually, what does the holiday season look like? Because our population increases by the size of a small city between May and August, and that isn't factored into current funding formula. And Devon and Cornwall experience the same at times when other places, so I'm Leicestershire, the police officer, that's where I started. You see Leicester basically an exodus through the summer months and the demand drops off, whereas it picks up here, and we've got to be a bit smarter in how we use our resources. For instance, parallel work with Chief Constables, and I sit within those groups.
If we're looking at just slicing the cake a different way, it's going to be, as you say, people lose. And it's just a case of making sure that the cake is enlarged rather than just cut a different way. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And I'm sure my colleagues on the panel will agree with me and both well in your quest to gain improved funding for Lincolnshire. Thank you. Okay, so our final question on the precepts from Councillor Pepper. Thank you.
Thank you. I have a question for both the Commissioner and the Chief Constable. But firstly, the Commissioner, what impact will the additional police precept funding provide to support delivery of the police and crime plan? And similarly to the Chief Constable, what impact will the additional police precept funding provide to support operational policing in Lincolnshire?
Thank you very much for the question. I think the two very much linked together. I mean, there is a section on page, I'm sure it's page 4, page 6, under service impact. I mean, there's basically, there are significant financial challenges even with the council tax precept. And it's one of those challenges I always like to be able to do is say what more we can deliver with more. And this is a case of what don't we have to cut with more, largely. But equally, it's about how we use the money we have to invest in the right things, to free up officer time, to make sure that when officers are deployed, they're deployed with the right equipment, training, to the right locations, with the right information, to be as effective as possible for the public. And some of that has got to, by its nature, be done in a way that isn't necessarily public facing. So a lot of the improvements that we're looking to deliver won't necessarily be visible. But there are some commitments that we've agreed to. Obviously, the recruitment of additional 67 officers to start training in 22. The increase in number of community managers by 12, which obviously will be seen and felt by our communities across the county. But then you start looking at some of the things that are really important to policing. Not that I'm saying that visibility in policing isn't, but some of these things that are less visible, providing additional equipment by expanding the digital forensics team, vital in modern crime fighting. You know, how many of us don't have digital devices on our person, on our desks right now? You know, everybody has got this, and the police need to be able to manage that huge flow of data and information. We need to deliver the new drug strategy. We know how drugs affect and harm all of our communities. You know, I am yet to find a community that doesn't say more should be done to tackle drugs and tackle the supply of drugs. Well, we already do a significant amount, but we've now DCC Jason Harwin, who is the national drugs lead, he's developed a Lincolnshire-wide strategy, which is a partnership strategy. But obviously, part of that, the police will need to deliver. Quite simply, we would struggle to deliver it without this funding because it's an additional ask. And really importantly, and it goes back to Councillor Waring's point earlier about the work we're doing about vulnerable people, boosting the Protecting Vulnerable Persons unit is vital to protecting vulnerable children and adults in our community. These are people that are often suffering the worst of harms that we can imagine, and we need appropriate levels of support, not just in the number of people that are in there, but also in the training and support for their well-being, working in such a challenging environment. And we've got to make sure these things are provided. And finally, in making sure that the new integrated offender management strategy is delivered. Reducing the number of crime is absolutely vital, and preventing people committing crime will obviously lead to that. So all of those will be delivered as a result of this council tax proposal, and quite simply, they won't be without it.
Thank you, Commissioner. Chief Constable, would you like to add anything?
Thank you, Chair. And for fear of repeating the Commissioner, I'll pick up on a couple of additional pieces there. So if we look at the funding and the flexibility that comes with tax precept uplift here, the first one around community beat managers, the most recent value for money profiles have just been released for policing. Lincolnshire over the period between the previous value for money profile and this one have decreased our local policing by about 6%. That bucks the trend nationally where it's been increasing. We're currently the 5th lowest nationally in terms of investment in local policing, and I want to correct that. So the 12 additional community beat managers is around about £500,000 plus, because they'll probably be officers at the top end of their pay scale, so it'll probably be nearer £600,000. That's about bringing our capacity back in, reducing crime and demand in those communities, and making sure that we're working with our most vulnerable communities, and making sure that, in line with my strategy, that we're stopping crime, we're helping those in need, and we're protecting people from harm. So that's the first operational piece that I think will make a huge difference to us. In terms of the fighting, the crime fighting capability around digital forensics and the drug strategy, it is almost impossible now to tackle drug supply without an appropriate and a resilient and robust and properly skilled digital forensics team. You just cannot do it. Everything is about phone attribution and movement of people and communications, and how county lines are operated through mobile phones, and the continual change of phones that these drug dealers are using. If we don't have the appropriate support through our digital forensics, then everything we do around the drug strategy basically fails. So that's a key piece of work, and more the evidence that we put in court, digital evidence, and particularly when we get to Crown Court cases, it is our digital analysts and digital intelligence officers who are being called, not the investigators, to give that evidence. So from my point of view, that's about preparing us for the future and making sure that we have the right skills moving forward from here. Protecting vulnerable people, this has been on the agenda for some time. We know that there is a bigger problem there than we can currently deal with. We're seeing an increase in referrals from the National Crime Agency, but even with our low investment, we are still performing exceptionally well. For the lowest funded force in the country, we sit 9th in crime outcomes, in positive outcomes, criminal justice and out of court. I'd like us to be the best, and I think we can achieve that. There has been a huge impact in terms of change in processes and the Attorney General and Director General guidance and file preparation and evidence preparation. And because of the nature of this work, the amount of redaction and video footage that we have to now has gone up exponentially in the last year, point where an average case is now taking 3 or 4 hours longer for an officer to put together. And when we're talking about vulnerable children and adults in this situation, the additional time taken to prepare that evidence is in excess of 30 per case. So we need to prepare for that, and we need to make sure that we have that. These are all ministerial priorities as well, set out in Annex C at page 15, and they're all mapped against those. And then in terms of integrated offender management, this is 3 cohorts going through at the moment, but as the Commissioner says, this is very much about how do we rehabilitate, how do we prevent reoffending, and linking that into the joint strategic needs assessment that has just been completed between police and other partners and the county council, which is I think a groundbreaking document, but the IOM is actually one of those methods which is proven in history and in other forces to be extremely effective in reducing offending. So significant challenges there, but I think these teams are going to make a tangible difference to keeping Lincoln. Thank you.
So thank you, Commissioner and Chief Constable, for that for your comments. Okay, so it's decision time for the panel around the Commissioner's proposal, which is that we approve the increase of the 22-23 police precept by £9.99, a 3.7% increase for a Band D property. We do note, Commissioner, that the public consultation has given a clear indication to protect services. And we understand from your briefing that 75% of constables are prepared to pay more. So the proposal you've heard, could I have a proposer for that? Mr. Kraviatz, and a seconder? Of course, yes.
Thank you, Chairman. We've been hearing about the fact that this is the increase this year is also available for the next 2 years. But I would like to make it clear that when we're looking at this year's budget, we're looking at this year's budget only, and agreeing to the increase this year has no influence or aspect on the next 2 years when there could be an increase along. We would have to look at each year individually at anything that the Police and Crime Commissioner has been allowed to do for the 2 subsequent years.
Absolutely. This is a decision making for the 22-23 police budget. Thank you. So going back, Mr. Kraviatz has proposed, seconder Councillor Burke. All in favour of this proposal? It's a unanimous vote, Commissioner and Chief Constable, that we approve your proposal. And also, ladies and gentlemen, I propose that the Democratic Services Manager, in consultation with myself, submits a report setting out the panel's comments on the Police Precept 2022-23 to the Commissioner. Proposer for that? Yeah, Councillor Marsh, seconder. Councillor Waring, thank you. All in favour of that? Yep. Once again, unanimous. Thank you. Thank you. So that's, yeah, Commissioner, you'd like to come back?
Yeah, I'd just like to make one final comment, if I may. Firstly, to thank the panel for their support, both with the precept, but also regarding the wider work we're doing on the funding formula. But just on Councillor Waring's point, I fully understand the situation regarding the single year versus multi-year. There is no possibility of doing a multi-year agreement. I wanted to be really clear and transparent with the public in my consultation, and there was clear support for a 3-year plan, knowing what the proposal was going to be, which is why I've set it out to you today, because that's what came back in the consultation from the public, that they would welcome that approach. It equally means that whilst you will have to sit here with me next year and the year after to go through this and make a decision on it, it means the Chief Constable has the ability to know what I'm proposing and what the public have supported thus far for his planning for the next 3 years, which is really important when we're talking about recruiting police officers. It was police and crime commissioners that led the charge, asking the government to allow us to plan for the longer term rather than just having the 1 year. And I was really pleased that we succeeded in that this year. So I understand legalities are talking about 1 year, but I just wanted to give you the context of why specifically I'd done it in that way. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Commissioner. And thank you for your time today. And Julie, thank you for your presentation. We'll shortly move to item 11. Also, Chief Constable, once again, thank you for your time today. Right, we'll now move to item 11 on the agenda, ladies and gentlemen, the complaints position statement. Mr. Birch, thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I've got nothing to add to the report.
Okay, thank you very much. We have seen the paperwork on your report, and we don't disagree with what you're saying. So thank you. Okay, thank you. So moving on to item 12, Councillor. Sorry. Oh, sorry, Mr. Birch. There's just one point. The panel has formed a small working group. All right. Sorry. Thank you. We're looking at forming a working group to work with you around complaints. Members of the working group, I think Mr. Kraviatz, Councillor Burke and Councillor Trotter, you are happy to form that working group to work with Mr. Birch. Can I have a proposer for that? Councillor Wotton, seconder, Councillor March, all in favour? Everybody's in favour around that? Yeah, so that is now formally approved, Mr. Birch. Thank you, just for your information. Okay, thank you. So moving on to item 12, National Association of Police and Fire Crime Panels. Councillor.
Thank you, Chairman. Nothing to report.
Okay, thank you for that. Just thank you, Mr. Birch. John Gilly Ross, I think, is the chairman of that association, and he has taken part in that webinar that I was involved in with the Home Office as well. So he's clearly, as the chairman, he's linking in to the Home Office and any developments around the effectiveness of police and crime panels. Thank you. So moving on to item 13, panel meeting schedule and work programme. Can I bring you in here, Mr. Medler, please? Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. The report set out in front of you contains the proposed meeting dates for this panel for 22-23. They follow a very similar schedule to previous years and are set approximately quarterly, but also have to meet the time frame for decisions like the Precept today. So that's all been taken into account. So one of the decisions required from the panel is to approve those meeting dates for next year. And then you can see within the programme, you've got the latest work programme for the panel and training programme. So that's there for information, and if any comments on that. I do know that we normally have a separate meeting to have a look at priorities for next year, and I think we'd be looking to meet informally as a panel to look at those probably around the April-May time. Thank you, Chairman.
Okay, thank you very much. Any questions, ladies and gentlemen? Mr. Medler? Councillor Wotton.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. Would it be possible to hold familiarisation for new members of Lincolnshire Police at the headquarters to show new members around the full set, control room, etc.? Thank you.
I think that's something I can take forward with Lincolnshire Police to see what they could offer at this time, Councillor. Thank you.
The police have always been very receptive and very positive about that sort of thing. So I think that we can achieve that. Councillor Marsh.
Thank you. On that subject, if we're going to arrange that, it might be better on the timescale when G4S hand the contract back. So we're actually showing the staff that we are interested in them, and it's not just a headless body here. It might give some support and comfort to them. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. So Mr. Medler will look to arrange that on our behalf. Councillor Waring.
Chairman, I wonder if you could clarify why I would have on Monday the 14th of February at 11 o'clock police and crime panel.
Yes, we can clarify. I'll turn to Mr. Medler to clarify that.
Thank you, Councillor Waring. As part of the Precept regulations, one of the powers this panel, all panels have, is that it has the power to veto a precept. And in that occasion, if that power is used, there's a need for a further Precept proposal to come forward. So we always provisionally put in place another meeting in case that power is exercised. Obviously, it hasn't been exercised today, and the Precept's been supported, so there isn't a requirement for that meeting. So you can, in short terms, remove it from your diary.
You've gained more time in your busy schedule, Councillor Murray. In terms of the meeting schedule, do we need formal approval of that? Okay, so could I have a proposer, Councillor Birch, and a seconder, Councillor Trotter? Thank you. All in favour? Those meetings, everybody okay with those meetings? So that is our meeting schedule for 22-23, ladies and gentlemen. And in terms of the work programme, any comments on the work programme? No. Okay. Fine. Thank you. So moving on to item 14 is the date of the next meeting of this panel, which is at 11 a.m. on Friday, the 10th of June. So I will now formally close the meeting at 12:31 roughly. Perhaps you could tell me when we stop live streaming. That would be helpful. Thank you.